Welcome to Crime Most French, a weekly podcast taking you through intriguing cases carried out on French soil. Researched and narrated by Cedric and rudely interrupted by me, Melanie. We're the true crime podcast on the Lions. Crack open le vin and let the mayhem commence. This week's podcast, we examine the case of Mata Hari, the World War I double agent that is a personification of femme fatale, exotic, man-hungry, and a way of worming secrets out of powerful men that allowed the war to progress. But does she really have the blood of thousands on her hands, or even act as a James Bond in a bejeweled bra with silk scarves? From a childhood that sounds like straight out of a Dickens novel, to the ending that sounds like out of a John le Carre novel, this is a story of a woman reinventing herself to survive. She creates a persona that ultimately helps her accusers paint her as a liar and a spy. But who was Mata Hari, or to give her real name, Margarita Gertrude Zell? Zell was born on the 7th of August 1876 in Leeuwarden, Netherlands, and was from a respectable family. Her father owned a hat shop and he was canny with his stock market choices, so they were quite well to do. So, as many may be surprised to hear, this exotic lady was not so exotic. She was ducked.
So presumably she wasn't born with the name Mata Hari.
No, not at all. That the name will come up later of how she names herself or someone else names herself. Very much the case with people who are larger than life. There are many stories. You don't know what's fact and what's fiction, and what is a lovely anecdote could be completely false.
Okay.
There was much made of her looks at school, apparently. She has been described by a classmate as being an orchid amongst either daisies or buttercups, depending on who you're reading. And she liked to wear flamboyant colours like red, which at the time was very unusual. So from early on, we could see that she was a person who liked to be the centre of attention. She was obviously born to be on the stage. This comfortable life that she had wouldn't last too long because her father's choices on the stock market suddenly started to go badly and they ended up bankrupt. With that bankruptcy and the normal strains and stresses on her relationship, the marriage came to an end and he just walked away from the family.
Oh, she was abandoned by her father?
Yeah, she was abandoned by her father. And not long after that, a couple of years after, her mother dies.
Okay.
So it's very Dickensian. She loses her father to another family. He goes off, he gets married to another family. And she's shipped off to a godparent who then decides that she should become a nursery nurse, primary school teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So she's at this institution. This is where the seeds of, no doubt, the image of her being a man-eater comes from. She has to leave the school under a shadow. Now, she wouldn't have been very old at this time. She would have been about 15 or 16. But apparently, she was either A, flirting with, or B, having a full-blown affair with the headmaster.
Okay.
Of the whole school. So it's been painted out that, she couldn't have an affair with the teacher. It had to be somebody
she has
who
to
was
go to the top.
The most powerful person. So she's obviously drunk on, she gets drunk on the power. So yeah, that was the kind of like the fly in the ointment to that career. That it came to an end. She shipped off to her uncle in The Hague. So there weren't really a lot of options for her at that time. I mean, like most women.
So that would have been late 19th century.
Yes, very much the turn of the century. So what do most women do for at that time? They start looking for a husband.
Mm-hmm.
So she starts reading the Lonely Hearts columns. And she sees an advert that was either, once again, here we go, we have two different stories. It was either put in by her husband or put in by the friends of her husband. He was one of these professional army types who didn't just enlist just to come straight back out the other side. He'd been in the army for quite a while and he was a captain. The advert apparently said, looking to return to the East Indies as a married man, and looking for a cultured young lady of pleasing appearance and gentle character. So she was 18 drops him a wee note, and as well as the note, she drops a nicely staged picture of herself as well. And
Okay.
Apparently MacLeod is his name. He's entirely smitten with her. Rudolph MacLeod is entirely smitten with her. Despite the fact that there's 20 years difference, the marriage goes ahead. One of the family members apparently is heard saying that it's not necessarily a great match, that she's passed from the hands of a caddish father into the hands of a caddish husband. We're already seeing clouds on the horizon for probably not a great marriage. Before they head off to Europe, they have a son, and in between they have 2 children. In between that, he gets posted to Java, and she joins him out in Java. And it certainly was no honeymoon. He already had a permanent concubine, as is the way of army officers.
In Java.
In Java, yeah. And once again, depending on who or what you read, especially from the family of MacLeod, are obviously not wanting to entirely besmirch him, but the kids all fall ill. Their version of the story is the nanny is very aggrieved and poisons the children. The other story, which to me sounds more plausible, is having a concubine and sleeping around with prostitutes will lead to syphilis. And he then passes the syphilis on to Zell, who then gives it to her kids in utero. So the kids are being treated for syphilis.
Oh, they are being treated for syphilis.
Yeah, well, that's the story. They were being treated for syphilis. Sadly, pre-penicillin, and they were being treated with mercury. And the poor wee chap, the son, dies.
Okay.
Which to me sounds more plausible.
Well, it would be easy to check because late-stage syphilis leaves traces on the bones.
Yeah, they could probably check now.
If somebody wanted to know.
Yes, but, I mean, they wouldn't have had late stage. He dies of poisoning. He doesn't die of syphilis. He dies because of the mercury. But whose bones they could check is the daughter. She, sadly, doesn't live to a ripe old age, which kind of indicates syphilis again. Letters which were released on the 100th anniversary of Mata Hari's death certainly indicate that she had syphilis, and she was entirely not much of a voracious lover, and she really had lost the appetite for it after the disease. But before all this, I think because she was obviously feeling lonely and isolated, she kind of immersed herself in the local culture. She also went out and joined a dance troupe, with obviously looking at the local ways of dancing and stuff, which would obviously stand her in fantastic stead for her later career.
Mm-hmm.
If that would be the one positive that she would get out of that marriage, because by all accounts he was a very violent drunkard. After the death of their son, they moved back to Holland again, and very soon after they get a divorce, and she sets up in a house, and she has her daughter for a while, but MacLeod goes out of his way to have investigators checking on her. He manages to make it look like, or in fact she was, seeing gentlemen callers and essentially saying she's a prostitute. That's not a great place to be bringing up a child. And on one of his visitations, left with his daughter, and she never saw her child again.
Okay.
Which to me is very sad. So she lost one child to poisoning of a various sort, and then she's lost access to the other child. So I mean it's sad, and especially when you think about she lost her family and she can't even keep hold of her family. So I mean I think it's interesting to see her as a woman rather than just as some kind of secret agent spy, which she was certainly painted out to be. I certainly think before the kind of like 80s and 90s, she was painted out as this man-eating secret agent.
Yes.
Which to me she just isn't. So what's a lady to do? Well, at this time we have to think about Europe, and we have to think about what's going on in Europe. You have the epicenter of all culture, you have the height of the Belle Epoque. So she decides it's time to head off to Paris.
Because long before the Roaring Twenties and New York was the epicenter for everything, and then in the 60s, like London was swinging, Paris was the center for all things creative. So she goes to Paris with very little money, and she starts to try and, build her life. And she becomes a model, an artist's model, and then eventually manages to progress to being kind of like a circus performer on a horse. Out of the blue, I don't know if she was a good horsewoman or not, but I found that very bizarre. And it was at that time when she was persuaded to think about dancing. She was dancing under the name of Lady Grisha MacLeod, and it wasn't until she changed the name, or someone suggested the name Mata Hari, which is a Malay phrase that means eye of the day.
Oh, okay, it means something.
It actually means something, yes. And she started to kind of like portray herself as some kind of exotic Indian princess. Just as all performers change their act, their name, their persona to fit who they are. I mean, we all know the likes of that well-known stilt walker from Bristol, Archie Leach. He's one of my favourite actors. I don't know if you love him, but that's Cary Grant. These people reinvent themselves. Look at Houdini. Houdini is Eric Weiss or something.
Something like that.
And he chose Houdini after
Robert Houdin.
Yeah, Robert Houdin, exactly. Thinking that adding the N-I at the end would mean of, so he would be of Houdin, which of course it isn't at all. But it shows that, yes, she reinvented herself, but she was a performer, and performers did that all the time. And that's one of the things that she was very much seen in a negative light as creating a persona. So she was a liar and a spy, because she wasn't, she'd hidden the fact that she was, a Dutch woman. So she must be a spy and a liar, which I think is very unfortunate. However,
there was also traditions sometimes at the time of changing your name. Like I know in my family, for example, one of the branches, nobody was called after their actual name. So my grandfather was Damien, but he's always been called all his life as Henri. Yeah. It wasn't his name. Mm-hmm. His mom was Henriette, and all her life she was called Maria. It's just, sometimes there's also traditions of changing your name.
I think the other interesting thing that you have to consider about Zella when she was performing, or Mata Hari, is her choice of venues. Rather than playing to the music halls, entertaining the cheap seats, she was very much playing in cultural venues. It was painted out to be, it was scandalous at the time. Nobody would think about, stripping down naked. It would be another 15 years before Josephine Baker would burst onto the scene, and she had nothing left of the imagination. I think Mata Hari, as I'll now refer to her, managed to be salacious, but do it in such a way where she wasn't tacky. I think that was what she was going for. She would play at conservatories and lyceums. She wouldn't play anywhere nasty. If it was now, she'd be playing, say, in New York, she'd be playing in the Met, or she'd be playing in the Albert Hall in London. It would be very, look at this beautiful cultural dance, isn't it amazing?
She must have done dancing in other places as well, because in the French Army papers, they call her a dancer from Folies Bergère and Moulin Rouge.
Ah, okay. I didn't read that. They certainly have compared her to contemporaries like Isadora Duncan, and she herself said that she was not a great dancer, but she was in a dancing troupe when she was in Java. So yes, it was a westernized version of what she was seeing, but at least she was, kind of trained as such. I don't know whether, you and I aren't trained dancers. The closest I've had to being trained in dancing is, learning the Gay Gordons when I was at school. So presumably most young ladies of that time probably could dance, and, you probably needed to dance. So possibly.
She's also described as very cultured and intelligent by the French army.
Yeah, and that's the thing. She could speak lots of languages. She wasn't dumb. I think she was naive, but she wasn't dumb, by any stretch of the imagination. You know, to carry on, you know, inventing yourself, I think is good. One of her admirers was in fact Puccini, who wrote a part based on her. So she certainly, while she was taking her clothes off, there was definitely very famous people watching her taking her clothes off, dancing the dance of the seven veils. As I said, not terribly authentic. Nowadays it would probably be booed as being culturally inappropriate or cultural appropriation, but it was still all the rage. As I say, she said that she never thought she was much of a dancer, but she was the first who dared to show myself naked, is what she said. She never ever took off her bejewelled bra. And once again, there's a case of, a jealous lover had bitten off one of her nipples, but I think in reality she wasn't incredibly well endowed, so I think she felt her breasts were a bit disappointing out of the old metal bra, so she kept it on. As is with all ladies, even back then, you age out of a career kind of quickly, and the same happened to her. She's knocking on 40, which is very old for a dancer, to be honest with you, but she's not getting much work in France anymore. So she has a review session, obviously for quite a while, set up in Berlin. It sounds like a great idea until I tell you it was in 1914. Because she had spent so much time in France, she was considered to be French by the Germans, and the Germans froze her bank account, took all the lovely jewels and lovely furs which only the great and the good of France had been giving her. This likes of one of the Rothschilds had been showering her with stuff. So she left Germany under a cloud and skint, basically. She goes back to the Netherlands and instantly starts up seeing this Dutch baron. Once again, she's not going to be even looking at anybody who doesn't have a massive bank balance. Certainly somebody with kudos, with a title. Here she is. She's got no money. I know she's got her ability to be a courtesan, is how I think she sees it in her head. But whereas now, she'd just be called a gold digger, I suspect.
Although we don't know for sure that she was given money by anybody.
No, but I certainly think she was given lots of... She certainly was given jewels and furs by people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think her life was kind of boring and stagnating in Holland because they were neutral. The Netherlands was neutral. So it was safe, but it was dull. And all the theatres, obviously, in France were closed. So here she was, kicking around, bored. And this is when we start moving on to the next phase of her life. We've seen her as the army wife. We've seen her as the performer and entertainer. Now she slips on the tuxedo and becomes James Bond. According to her spying career began when Karl Kromer, the German consul in Amsterdam, contacted her in 1915. This is the story she recounts to the French prosecutor Pierre Bouchardon in 1917. According to her, had given her 20,000 francs and 3 bottles of secret ink in exchange for providing the Germans with whatever information she could get in Paris. She says she agrees, she's had her money stolen from her by the Germans. She sees it as compensation and the Germans owe her this money. So she happily takes the money and, according to her, throws the bottles of woo-woo ink in the canal and never actually does any secret writing, any spying, But the problem is, when you have a high profile and when you don't travel light, shall we say, when she was crisscrossing across the continent, she'd be going from Netherlands, and rather than going straight to France, she'd be going via Spain, and she wasn't a lady that travelled light. So on one of the occasions when she was on the boat that stopped in by Falmouth, yes, in the UK as a port stop, she had 11 pieces of massive luggage. That's not travelling light. The port authorities kind of like, we know who she is. Why is she travelling with so much stuff? So she gets her collar felt because she's given 2 conflicting stories about why she's there. So she's had her collar felt by the British authorities. They've gone, yeah, we're not letting you go back to the Netherlands, because she was actually coming from Spain to go back to the Netherlands. They actually sent her back to Spain again.
There's a fairly good reason to do that, though, because Belgium and Germany were enemies, so you couldn't cross them.
No,
so to go from France to the Netherlands, you had to go round.
Yeah, logistically, you did have to go round.
And the easiest was to go via Spain, the UK, and then the Netherlands.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you couldn't fly over Belgium.
No.
So, and also there was no airline.
Yes. Yeah, those Wright brothers just hadn't got their fingers out yet.
Well, they just had, because it was 1905, but there was no airline yet. They were just starting to use planes during the war.
That is very true. Yes, the 20-minuters, isn't it? Isn't that the nickname of the pilots? Of course, I'm basing my knowledge on Blackadder. Good Lord.
Yes. I haven't heard 20 minutes, but that's when the Red Baron, for example, happened, and when they developed most of the technology for planes. So it's not
unheard of, but certainly, and obviously they were using Zeppelins as well, weren't they?
Oh, lots of balloons of all kinds. Yes.
Yeah, but anyway, I don't. That's the reason. But she gets sent back to Spain. So the Brits then think to themselves, you know what? I think we'll get in touch with France and tell them I'd watch out for her. She smells a bit rum.
Yeah, because they were allies.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yes, yeah, they were all part of the same side
with the Russians.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And as you mentioned Russians, I think it's probably time to mention Maslov. Maslov was a Russian pilot who Mata Hari was apparently totally smitten with. She claimed he was the love of her life, and he was part of a unit that flew for the French. As you say, sadly, the 20-minuters, as I like to think of them, he actually did get shot down, and she was just beside herself.
But presumably he didn't die.
No, he didn't die, and he will pop up later in the story and not cover himself in glory, to be quite frankly honest with you. It's at this time the French have leverage to say, okay, if you want to go and see your lover who's near the front, and she needs permission to go near the front, and that's when she first contacts the Le 12e Bureau.
She's a foreigner, so as a foreigner in times of war, she needs permission to go anywhere.
Yeah, yes, within France and stuff. Yes, obviously she doesn't need permission to kind of like go to go to Spain. But
she yes, she does. Yeah. Her passport is checked before she leaves, and she's allowed to go or not, because she's a foreigner. So entry and exit of the countries are all controlled, but even travel within the countries are controlled. So yeah, she had to ask permission for anything.
So she has a contact of Captain Georges Ledoux, who approaches her to travel to Brussels to seduce Moritz von Bissing, the military general of occupied Belgium. And she agrees to that and hopes that this is, the end of things, and this means that she can have this nest egg and she can stop all this nasty spying business. So something that she could, like you're leaving the table early when you're gambling, when you're ahead. That's how she thinks of it in her head. I have to say that the timeline for all of these things is very muddy. Researching on her early life was fine, but searching for the stuff that was during the war was kind of tricky. So one of the times she's travelling back to the Netherlands from Paris, she's passing through Madrid when she sends Ledoux letters through the hotel post, not through any secret means, no secret contacts, no drop points or anything. And she openly speaks to a French officer about an intelligence assignment that involves seducing German military attaché Major Arnold Keller,
probably.
yeah. She claimed she was only taking him in order to get information to seduce the Kaiser, which is the big story that everybody has heard of, that she was going to be paid 1 million francs to seduce the Kaiser and bring down the Germans. But of course, this sounds utterly ludicrous. Although Keller provided useful information, he became convinced that she was a double agent.
Okay.
Given how much she speaks to the French side, is it questionable that she speaks to the German about the French side? I don't know. Maybe that's how he's convinced. But he's convinced that she's a double agent and she's working for the French. In order to incriminate her, he sends a telegram which is intercepted, actually at the Eiffel Tower, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, because it was the main telegraph transmitter.
Exactly. It's huge. I mean, it's, at that point it's huge. Not so much now, obviously. Although you're not allowed to build above a certain height in Paris.
No more than 5 floors.
And in this telegram, he refers to her as Agent H21. And he uses a code, which you would think most spies use, but he uses a code which they know the French have cracked. So he knows full well that the French are going to be reading this and know full well that she's obviously dealing with the Germans. So sounds like me, sploosh, he's totally dropping her in it.
But what would be his interest in doing that?
I think to expose her.
But why? What does it have to gain? She's a double agent. He could use her as a double agent. Why throw her away?
I don't know.
Because at the same time, he pays her money, which is kind of strange.
Yeah, I don't know. But I mean, it does kind of indicate that unless he's an idiot and he didn't know, but that's not very likely either.
Well, it's very strange that he would make it easy for the French to pick her up and execute her. But at the same time pay her money. What would be the point of giving her any money? It's not like she has any leverage or anything. Mm-hmm. So why would he want to give her money? That doesn't seem consistent.
No.
Either you get rid of her and you don't give her anything, or you pay her because she's doing stuff for you, but in that case, you're not giving her away.
I just think there are so many inconsistencies around about this story because of who she is and what she was doing. There's the water is just so muddy. Mm-hmm. You just don't know who to believe, what to believe, and it's during war. Can you believe either side? And this all happens, and at the end of 1916, she's given the name of 6 Belgian agents by the French. The French know that one of them has been working for both sides and the others are all German. They know that they're working for the Germans. So she's told this, and then she leaves Paris not long after. It turns out the one who was a double agent was the only one that was shot by the Germans. All the others, the other 5, were never shot. That kind of indicates that she'd been
giving information to the Germans.
She definitely looked like, we don't know who she told, she might not have told anyone important. She sounds a bit of a gabber, to be honest with you. She sees a man in uniform, she obviously just, loose lips sink ships, as I've said in the past, so that was the nail in the coffin. That was literally the nail in her coffin, because the French then arrested her. Captain Pierre Bouchardon is the main interrogator who basically looked behind the curtain of who she was and it exposed her as a fake. She's just plain old European folks like you and me, we can't trust her. She's clearly a fake and a spy. Also, Ledoux, who she'd been working with previously, managed to paint out most of the stuff that she'd been doing in such a bad and horrible light that even accusing her of tampering with evidence, that she was kind of like almost dead in the water. She did readily admit to taking money from the Germans, but she said she only ever gave kind of like gossip column, pillow whispering information away. She wasn't giving away anything strategic to the Germans because she loved France. And
at the same time, when she was interrogated by the French, she said she kind of liked the Germans as well. And the guy who was interrogating her was saying, we were flabbergasted. She was telling a French interrogator that she was kind of keen on the Germans during the war. And they just couldn't understand why she was saying that.
No. I mean, if you're declaring your love for one country, you don't pay compliments to the enemy.
Exactly. That's strange.
Not a great look. And the whole time she was saying, okay, these men, being the men that they are and being who she was happy to paint her out to be just the most, money-grubbing, nasty, bed-jumping woman you've ever met. And she was happy to admit she was a harlot, but she kind of initially, never initially, she always refused to say that she was a traitor. And I think that the bitter blow for her must have been when the Russian pilot, who now only had one eye and was probably quite bitter and twisted, refused to give her a character witness. Always trying to get to the front, going to the French to offer to spy for them so she can get to see him. All that was utterly pointless. I think that's pretty sad. And I think at this point in the war, there was a lot of uprisings and among certain battalions, and Clemenceau had only just come into power. So I think they essentially threw her under the bus, and they wanted to show that she was, possibly worse than she actually was. But she was certainly the figurehead of, we're not taking any of that nonsense. We won't have any traitors in the country. And that was it. It was game over. It was a done deal. I believe you've got more information on the actual trial itself from the French side. I mean, obviously, I've told you very much from the English-speaking side, but what did the French have to say about her, and how did the whole thing unfold?
I don't have all the information about the trial itself,
No.
But I read part of the file released by the French army about the instruction and the trial of Mata Hari.
Mm-hmm.
It's 1,200 pages
Yeah,
long.
it's a lot.
I have a summary of the French view of things,
Mm-hmm.
so I'll tell you what that is. In August 1916, Mata Hari requests the permission to travel to Vittel. There will be a map on the website. It's in the east, not far from the Swiss border. It's a spa town. As a foreigner, she has to ask permission because she's not allowed to travel anywhere without permission. The French services know that she arrived in June the same year, and she stayed at the Grand Hotel in Paris. And she seems at the time to be very interested in meeting army people. And they say, strangely, she wasn't interested in rich people. She wasn't trying to meet rich people. She wanted to meet uniformed people. And that's why she was reported to the secret services in France, because people thought, that woman is really trying to meet soldiers and generals and stuff. Why? So that's how they learned about her.
So it wasn't just the English that were raising the red flag?
No, that was long before. Yeah, no. They were aware that she was there, and they were following her all the time. And part of the reason why they allow her to go to Vittel is that they don't want her to realize that she's being watched. So they think that by allowing her to go away for a little while, still keeping an eye on her, she's followed all the time, even when she goes to Vittel, she won't think that they have anything about her, they don't know about her, so she's happy. So they allow her to go. She goes to Vittel. There, she tries to meet more soldiers, more military personnel.
I'm taking it she's not chatting up the privates then. She's
looking
for the brass. She's going for the brass.
Yeah, she likes big uniforms.
So I mean, this would have been kind of like well after the time when she was approached by the Germans. Yeah, because it was 1915. It was a year before.
She says she wants to go to Vittel for health reasons, but the French secret services don't believe it for a second, because they intercept some of her letters to von Kapellen. Her Dutch lover, I guess.
Okay. Is that the Baron?
The Baron.
Yeah,
well, most of them are Barons anyway. But yeah, the Baron von Kapellen, where she says that she's in very good health. So at the same time, she says, I'm all frail and I need to go to Vittel, and Secret Services don't believe her for a second. So they think that she's up to something already. Now,
hang on a minute. If I'm adding correctly and being kind of like semi-observant, but don't you get water from there? You get bottled water from there, don't you?
Yeah, there's a bottled water brand, yes. Because there's sources and all that. It's in the mountains. So she goes and she requests a permit and she does her thing over there. She is watched, she comes back. Ladu, who then starts handling her. So she promises to him, when she's requesting permission to travel and after, because they then ask her to come and continue talking to them, she promises a lot of very useful information in exchange for 1 million francs. So you said that she was approached by the French and offered money again for information. The French version, which is based on transcripts of interrogation, says that she offered the information in exchange for the money, but she didn't have the information yet.
No.
So what she says is she'll go to Holland. She always calls it Holland because that's what it's called in French. It's the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
And she'll contact Verfbane, who apparently is the right hand of Bob von Bissing that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, uh-huh.
He's one of the richest bankers in Holland, apparently. Then she'll go from there to Brussels. She'll have lots of sexy clothes. And she'll spend some time in the army HQs. And she'll get information. She won't stay long, because she doesn't want to stay around there for no reason and for little information.
Yeah.
She'll strike a big coup, she says, and then she'll leave. But in exchange, she wants $1 million, but they don't have to pay her until she gives them the information, they check the information, and they realize the value of the information.
And it's verified, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So she doesn't ask for money up front. She asks for money afterwards. The French side says they never gave her any actual mission. They only promise her that she'll be contacted by agents once in a while.
Uh-huh.
And she is contacted once by an agent who, I don't have the name, who manages to convince her to go to Spain and then Belgium. The reason why they send her to Spain is that it's a neutral country and there's a very good spy network in Spain. But we know now from history that it's a good network on both sides.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, they like to play both sides on the spy.
Yeah. On the 4th of November 1916, she receives 5,000 francs from the Holland consul called Bunger. She doesn't stop in Madrid. The French are a bit disappointed. And on the 9th of November, she's in Vigo, in Spain, and she boards the Hollandia. That's the boat. That's the Hollandia that was stopped in Falmouth by the English.
Ah, yes, uh-huh.
They pretend at least that it was a mistake, and they release her on the 20th of November, but they send her back to Spain.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's how she ends up in Madrid. And in Madrid, on the 15th of November, she meets von Kalle, who's the main German spy in Madrid.
Yes.
She then meets a French colonel, and she tells him that she collected useful information from von Kalle.
Yeah, that agrees with what I found out, yeah.
One of the things she says is that the chief spy in Spain is Baron Roland, who's the general consul. She also mentions that there will be a landing in Morocco by the Germans.
Oh, yes.
That the Germans use invisible ink, and she explains how it works. That the Germans can decode French secret messages, and that the Germans are aware of the trips a French pilot, who's called Védrine, does behind the enemy lines to drop people. She comes back to Paris in January 1917, and then at that point, the secret services in France decide to ignore her. They just don't talk to her. They refuse her calls, refuse her letters. They don't want to see her. So she panics. She, at that point, desperately tries to go back to the Netherlands because she realizes she's on her own and she's in hot waters.
Yeah.
She receives 5,000 francs from Bunger again. On the 10th of February 1917, the army on French side decides to act against her. And they say, okay, now it's time to do something about her.
Yeah.
So she's arrested on the 13th at the hotel on Champs-Élysées.
The Lisa Hotel, yeah.
Yeah. She's interrogated 9 times. She denies everything at first. She plays dumb, and she pretends not to even know the grade of the German that she meets. So she doesn't know there's a colonel, there's a general. She doesn't know any of that. She doesn't understand those things. So she's a bit like a woman who doesn't know about cars, and it's just a red car.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And for her, it's just a German uniform.
Yeah. It's a guy in a uniform.
Yeah, that's it. So she plays dumb at the start. The French point out to her that the Germans are trying hard to recruit agents, and she's there. She speaks currently 4 languages.
Yeah,
she's famous.
Does. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She has access to high-ranking army personnel. She's intelligent.
Yeah.
And she says the Germans are not interested in her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you
Not
can
likely.
play dumb, but you don't push it too far because then it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So for the French, even if they didn't know what she had done, she would obviously
be a candidate for...
Yeah, she would be courted by the Germans,
of
obviously.
Course. And she was. And we know she was. And she did.
Yeah, but she plays dumb and says, no, nobody talked to me.
Well, I thought she eventually admitted it, didn't she?
Eventually, yes. Yeah. To try to corner her, the army provides... That's the police, the secret services and the police who interrogate her. Okay. But the army decides to provide information. They don't normally do that, but they provide information like telegraphs that they intercepted. Mm-hmm. Telegraphs between von Kalle and Germany, for example. Yeah. As proof that she is age 21.
Age 21, yeah.
Those messages mention never mention her by name.
No.
But they mention H21. But what they say about H21 is exactly what they know Mata Hari did.
Yes.
So they mention when she arrives.
Yeah.
They mention who
Yeah.
she meets. They mention what boat she's
Yeah.
going to be on. They mention the money she gets.
Oh,
by
yeah.
who.
They
They
leave
mention
in no
everything
doubt.
in detail.
Yeah. They short of putting a acrostic on the actual, telegram. Yeah, I mean, they've made it very obvious that she was H21.
Yeah, but the French know that anyway already. But they give her that saying, okay, you can stop lying to us. We have all that information. We intercepted from the Germans. They also mention that she gets money via her maid and Lintiens, as far as I can tell. Lintiens. I don't know how to speak Dutch. And therefore, given that there can't possibly be two H21s,
No.
and it matches her, it is clearly her. So clearly, she's a German spy. They don't know everything Mata Hari told the German. They can only know what has been sent via radio because they can break the German code.
Mm-hmm.
They mentioned, for example, that she gave them information about what Princess George of Greece was going to do. I don't remember what importance Greece had to do in the First World War.
No.
Well, I guess they were fighting the Turks, which were on the German side.
Well,
but
that's true, yes.
I don't know who George of Greece was.
Probably Phil's dad.
Well, she's probably related, yeah. She also gave them information about a spring offensive handled by the British. She told them information about the political situation in France, and she gave them information about the parties opposed to the Briand government in France. She also mentioned the control the UK has over a lot of things during the war, and the fear that some of the politicians in France have about that, because they feel like the English are running the show.
Yeah.
So she gave all that to the Germans, which is what they were sending her to France for.
Feeding her the information.
No, she was telling that to the German.
That's what she was telling to the... Okay, right.
But that's only what she told, what the Germans said over the radio. Encrypted
So
over the
there
radio.
may have been, in fact, screeds more, but...
There was probably way more, but they couldn't intercept mail. They could only intercept
that's
radio.
very true. Whether it was an ink or secret ink.
Yeah. So they also know that she was paid 3,500 pesetas in Madrid, for example. Eventually, she confesses on the 21st of May.
Right.
She says how she was contacted by the German consul Kramer at her house in Holland.
Mm-hmm.
The payment for the 20,000 francs for information gathered in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
She says, like, as you mentioned, that she only decided to accept because the Germans had kept her furs and therefore she wanted her money back.
Yeah, well, I don't think... I mean, remember, she had her bank account frozen and, it wasn't just... they took her assets. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, we're just taking your furs as you leave the country.
In a transcript from interrogations, she just mentions the fur as furs and nothing else. Clearly that bothers her, these furs. She doesn't mention a bank account. She doesn't mention her jewelry. She mentions the furs.
Well, no,
I don't know.
From what I've read in various different places, it wasn't just...
Yeah, they probably took the rest, but it's the furs
It was the dead animals on her back.
Yeah, that's the thing that was really bothering her. She explains all the stuff about the secret ink that you mentioned, that she refused to... She also mentioned that she refused to use it. She even talks about being H21. When she tells stories and she says when she's controlled by the Germans, she's H21. And then when she refuses to do what the Germans say, she becomes herself again. That's how she explains, I guess, being a double agent.
She can compartmentalize herself like that, can't she?
Yeah, I guess so. And she justifies the 1 million francs that she says she wants for information because she wants to go and live with the Captain Maslow.
Yes.
So that's consistent with what you heard. The main thing the French side uses for the trial to prove that she's a spy is the money she receives from the German.
Okay.
And we know from the Germans that they paid her. We know from her because she admitted that she received money from the Germans. And the French have seen that money as well. So everybody knows that she was paid by the Germans. And as far as the guy who was leading the inquiry for the trial is concerned, that simple fact is enough to make her a spy and execute her. He said, I don't need to say any more, but let's go into more details. But at that point, just because of that money, just because she gets money from the Germans for information, and it doesn't matter what information it is, she's a spy, she deserves to die. That's the end of it.
The minute she takes a mark from them, that's it. Yeah.
Also, they don't believe for a second that she was called by the Germans to go on a mission for 20,000 francs. They have a guy in the east of France, I can't remember his name, who's apparently the expert on German spies, and he says that kind of money comes for a high-value mission by a high-value agent. You don't pay 20 grand for a newbie who's going to go on a rookie mission to get some flimsy information. They said there's absolutely no way the Germans gave her 20,000 francs for just going to Paris and listen to people talk.
Yeah.
There was more. She's probably been spying for them for a long time. She was a high-level agent at that point, and that's why she gets that much money. There's no way she was a newbie when she says she was.
Yeah, I mean, she was. I mean, they did send her away for training and stuff. So, I mean, it was definitely, you can't, she was foolish to blankly deny it.
Yeah. So they calculated how much she got paid, and over 8 months, she got paid 34,000 francs by the Germans. And she admits that, yes, she got that money. The fact that she never mentioned to the French Secret Services, mainly to Ladoux, that she was age 21 and she was on a mission from Kramer is another proof of, at that point, double agent. So not only they know she's a spy because they know she's been paid, but now, because she never mentioned that she was spying for the Germans, they know she's a double agent. Yeah. And that adds to the weight of the stuff that's going to be used in the trial. And finally, the fact that she said that the spy chief in Spain was the Baron Roland, which the French services know is not true because the Germans have tried to feed that information to the French via many means, including other double agents.
Okay, so...
And they know it's not true.
She's clearly getting that information from the Germans.
Also, she's clearly repeating information that is not true. Because they know it's a guy called Rugeberg, who is apparently the consul in Barcelona. They know for a fact that this is the chief of all spies in Spain. And she says it's another guy. And that's the line the German wants to give to the French. So again, clearly she's a double agent. Yeah, so that's what they based the trial on. Okay. That's the summary of the information they had against her. And out of that, they got eight things that are going to be the accusations during the trial. So the first one is that she got into Paris in December 1915 to collect information and documents for the Germans, who are enemy.
Okay, yeah.
The second one is that in the first semester of 1916, she provided Germany, and in particular through Consul Kramer, documents and information potentially negatively impacting the army operations and compromising the safety of military installations. The third one is that in May 1916 in Holland, she exchanged information with Kramer again with the aim of helping the enemy. The fourth one is that she entered the military camp that was Paris at that point in June 1916 to collect documents and information to help Germany, enemy country. The fifth one is that in May 1916 she exchanged information with Germany, enemy country. The sixth one is she went to Madrid in December 1916, exchanged information with Germany, enemy country, through von Keller to help enemy endeavors. The seventh one is that to have in the same location and time provided Germany, through von Keller again, documents and information that would have negative impact on military safety and installations, in particular documents about internal policy, spring offensive, the discovery of the French of invisible ink. So she told the French about the invisible ink, but she also told the Germans about the fact that the French knew about the invisible ink.
Okay.
And the communication of the name of one British agent as well. And the last one is to have in Paris in January 1917 exchange information with Germany, enemy country, to help them in their endeavors. That's the 8 things that are going to be the charges during the trial.
As we all know, it didn't go well for her. She was found guilty. On the 15th of October, she was executed by a 12-man firing squad. And this being Mata Hari, she wasn't just led out with no makeup on and looking bedraggled. She looked at her best, looked at her finest. She had her nicest clothes on. She made herself up. Apparently she blew a kiss to the squad. She refused to be bound or blindfolded. And she took it like a man, apparently. She just slumped to her knees and toppled over. And that was that. I think what we're seeing now as part of her legacy is the declassification of the MI5 documentations and the Mata Hari Foundation requesting from the French government to exonerate Zella. They said that we believe that there are sufficient doubts concerning a dossier of information that was used to convict her to warrant reopening the case. Maybe she wasn't entirely innocent, but it seems clear she wasn't the master spy whose information sent thousands of soldiers to their death, as had been claimed. But
yeah, that's the Spring Offensive.
Yeah, but to my mind, you can put lipstick on a pig and it's still going to be a pig. She was taking money and was looking for money from both sides in a war, and she committed treason.
Yes.
And, whether she tried to play gentleman callers off of each other, maybe that's what she was used to, but you don't do that with sides in war, and you get your fingers burnt and you get shot.
Yeah, it sounds like that she was used to do what she was doing with the two armies, so meeting officers
Yes.
and spending time with
Yeah,
officers. The French even has a list of all the officers that were her lovers over time from a whole bunch of different countries. So it looks like that she was used to do that, and she didn't realize that in a time of war, doing that is treason.
Yeah, it's
the punishment
wrong.
for treason is execution.
It's not.
She didn't understand.
It's not tittle tattle. It's
Yes.
not Parisian tittle tattle.
Yeah, exactly. She didn't seem to understand the difference.
Yeah, and that's where she may have had a magnificent sized brain. She may have been able to speak that many languages fluently, but she was mighty naive, thinking that she could play with fire and not get away with it. Much as I think I liked reading about her life, and I felt so sorry for her, that I think many men in her life have let her down. And that may be why she thought it was okay to behave the way she did. But love, you did wrong. You pays your money, you take your chance. And the moral of the story is, don't play with fire. It burns.